Recently, I made a video about why roguelike as a genre is unhelpful when it comes to game design. And in that video I also criticized other game-like genres and expressed frustration with people who create and encourage genre names like that. However, I realized that I was being somewhat harsh, as I do understand why people do this, and that in certain situations it can be pretty helpful to describe games like that. So in this video I'd like to explain why people come up with these kinds of terms and what situation they are even useful in. Also, I'd like to share some other realizations I've had when it comes to genre, which will also help when I finally finish that video on the RPG genre I've been working on.
What is this, self-service? Hello? Hello?
To begin with, the situation where using a term like Souls-like would be useful is from a customer point of view when buying games. Because I am a game designer and like to think about games in a theoretical way, I like terms to be exact. So I know that when I talk to someone about something like an RPG, I know we are both talking about the same thing. However, customers generally don't care about all that. What they want is to be able to easily find the games they want to play. So when someone plays a game like Dark Souls, and they want to play more games like that game, it is understandable that they'll go looking for games like Dark Souls. A Dark Souls-like, if you will. They'll be all like, oh wow, that looks cool, I want something like that. And this also happens with developers, as they'll be all like, oh wow, that looks cool, I want to make something like that, but slightly altered according to my vision. And when these devs upload their games to Steam, they obviously want to give it some kind of tag that lets people find it easier. Even if a developer doesn't believe in Souls-like as a genre, are they going to risk losing out to potential customers who clearly want to play their game? Of course, you could argue that the games like this section exists for people to find similar games, but I'm pretty sure Steam mostly uses tags for that system as well, so whatever, I don't mind. As long as we all understand that these are not genres, but more so collections of games which are similar to each other as a result of them being inspired by a certain game. But there are other reasons why games get entire genres named after them. And one of these reasons is that some people think that these games are so good that they deserve to have a genre named after them. One example of this is the RPG genre. This genre is often associated with cleverness or complexity. And so, a lot of people will insist that their favorite game being an RPG makes that game smart, and makes them smart for playing it. Of course, this is stupid. A game's genre has nothing to do with its quality. There are smart shooter games and there are dumb shooter games. Hell, there are even dumb puzzle games, and that genre is all about being smart. Of course, when it comes to the RPG genre, there are a lot of games which are thought to be RPGs but aren't, which I will explain more about in that RPG video I make. However, if you were to tell someone their favorite RPG, let's say, Final Fantasy VII is not an RPG, there's a good chance they'll get defensive, even though you didn't say anything about its quality. But maybe that's a little too much of a hypothetical situation for you. A better example of a game getting a genre named after it because of a sense of deserving is what happened with Metroidvanias. First we had Metroid, which became famous for its non-linear level design and backtracking and such. At that point Metroid-like wasn't a term yet, but when Castlevania Symphony of the Night came out, it suddenly became known as a Metroidvania, which is just odd. Surely Symphony of the Night should just be a Metroid-like. But because it was so good, I guess people found it to be deserving of being part of the term. The same thing happened when Bloodborne came out. Souls-like suddenly became Soulsborne. Again, seemingly only because of a sense of deserving. What makes it even more confusing is that the Vania in Metroidvania doesn't even refer to the original Castlevania games. Just the Symphony of the Night. Hell, Symphony of the Night wasn't even the first Castlevania game to adopt a Metroid style. That honor goes to Castlevania II Simon's Quest, which may not have been that good, but did have the same non-linear level design and backtracking structure, which is the problem, isn't it? Castlevania II is not considered to be worthy of being a Metroid-like. But sometimes people don't see that a game has Metroid-like elements, even if they do like the game. See, I realized that Zelda games are actually structured a lot like Metroid games, with their non-linear map design, where you obtain new powers which allow you to backtrack to previous areas to find new things. The main difference is that it plays along the X and Z axes, as opposed to the X and Y axes, in which case Zelda 2 is even more similar, even with the way the temples are designed. So why do people not realize this? Well, I think it's mainly a matter of aesthetics. You see, players usually experience a game from the point of the aesthetics first, and then as they play, discover the dynamics and mechanics. Whereas developers start with mechanics, which inform the dynamics, which in turn inform the aesthetics. This is the source of all of these like genres. When a bunch of games look like each other, it is concluded that they must be the same genre. But this is of course deceiving, and will result in huge contradictions. It's also interesting to note that Koji Igarashi, creator of games such as Symphony of the Night and Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, actually tried to change the term Metroidvania to Igavania.
What are you doing in my swamp? What are you doing in my swamp?
Recently I played all the way through Metroid Dread and the beginning of Dark Souls, both for the first time and practically simultaneously. And what I noticed was that Metroid Dread's map design felt really old-fashioned. Like, instead of trying to be the best it could be, it was more concerned with being similar to Super Metroid, like how you would need to constantly fire missiles and bombs just to uncover breakable blocks. It led to a lot of frustrating moments, where I was just stuck because I couldn't find the one breakable block that led to the next power-up. At one point I had just unlocked the forest area, which I very quickly had to leave through a teleporter. But after I left through said teleporter, there was no clear direction to go. So I decided to go pick up whatever items I'd missed, but even after doing all that, I still could not continue. It felt like I had missed something. After trying everything, including trying to chase an enemy into its crawl space, I realized that it had to be somewhere close to the teleporter. So I went back through the teleporter and found the one hidden block, which led to the power I guess I was supposed to find. But the way it was hidden felt more like there should have been an energy tank there, not the necessary item that was vital to my progress. So I wondered what was actually the point of this huge interconnected map, if it wasn't for the purpose of exploration and choice. Because the game felt incredibly linear to me. Like, it may as well have been a huge hallway if the only reason to backtrack is to get a missile upgrade or 10, while missing one power completely halters your progress. And the funny thing is, I actually found Dark Souls to do the whole interconnected world with backtracking thing way better than Metroid. From the very beginning, Dark Souls gives you the choice of going to 3 different areas: the Catacombs, New London Ruins, and Undead Burg. It is obvious the player is supposed to go to the Undead Burg first, because it is the easiest. But you do have the option to go somewhere else. As I made my way through the game, I felt like my choices of where to go were always plentiful. And as I collected more powers and shortcuts, I actually felt my choices increase. The completely opposite feeling I had while playing Metroid, where I was continuously scared I would run up against another progress wall. Sure, you may not be able to beat an area, but that entirely relies on your resources and skill as opposed to a physical limitation the game has placed on you. The best example of this feeling of freedom I can give is when I went to the sewers, which I ended up clearing out completely even as I had my health halved from getting cursed by falling in a hole. After I had killed everything, I tried finding the boss room, which I had seen. I knew what it was, but I just couldn't find the white wall. So after 5 minutes of rechecking, I just left. Yeah, I just left. I figured I would just return some other time since I had so many other options. Me not being able to find that boss wasn't frustrating in the slightest, even though I actually had a very similar experience in Metroid Dread, where I didn't realize this was the entrance to a boss fight, and I didn't decide to check it since it appeared like a block that could only be broken by a bomb. Ended up backtracking for about half an hour at that part too. Instead I decided to take on the statue under the blacksmith, which I beat by using the Iron Flash Pyromancy spell to shield his attacks. After that I went into the forest where I easily beat the Lunar Mod, which gave me a key to the bottom of a tower, which led to an enemy so strong, even Iron Flash was not enough to reliably block his attacks. So instead, I decided to use some poison darts, which I had bought from some shopkeeper I had unlocked, to poison the guy, which took like 3 minutes to drain his health. But I got him in the end. And this is exactly the kind of experience you would expect of a Metroid game, right? Dark Souls is a game where you explore a maze-like semi-open area with somewhat linear levels, where you unlock new shortcuts and new powers which allow you to take on different enemies and bosses in whatever order you want. Hell, remember how I used pyromancy to beat that statue? Well, I got that pyromancy from a guy in the sewers. I unlocked an ability from one area which allowed me to backtrack to a previous area to beat an enemy I couldn't before. Doesn't it sound an awful lot like Metroid? And that's the crazy thing. Dark Souls does the thing Metroid is famous for better than it. Yet it is not recognized as a Metroidvania, but as a Souls-like. And not because people think it's not deserving, but because people just don't see it. Just like with Zelda and Castlevania 2, it is not aesthetically like Metroid. Meanwhile, there are games like Hollow Knight, which is considered Souls-like, but is also considered a Metroidvania. Now, I'm sure the devs were inspired by Metroid as well, but my point is they didn't have to be. Dark Souls could have been the only inspiration. People are too focused on the aesthetics of games rather than the actual mechanics. Yes, when you look at a Hollow Knight screenshot, it looks like Metroid, and these other games don't. But that's exactly why more focus has to be put on the individual mechanics rather than what the game looks like at a glance. There is this YouTuber called Iron Pineapple, and maybe you've heard of him. And he makes these great videos where he just plays a whole bunch of Souls-likes, right? Which he pretty much correctly identifies as games that are a little bit like Dark Souls, although the rules aren't that strict. But what is really funny is the amount of games he plays that are part Metroidvania. Like, especially in his most recent video, pretty much every single game is a Metroidvania.
Alright, first up we got Pseudo Regalia. This is a retro-inspired 3D platformer Metroidvania. Crowsworn is a Hollow Knight and Bloodborne-inspired Metroidvania. Dismantle is a Souls-like Metroidvania. So we are getting a bit of like this Metroidvania-esque design. This is another 2D Metroidvania Souls-like, a 2D Souls-like Metroidvania roguelike, a 3D platformer Metroidvania. The Metroidvania... It's the Cleric Beast mixed with Ridley from Metroid.
Are there any other
Metroidvanias.
I should know about? Meow. I'm out of here.
Hum dum dee dum, I'm so rumbly in my tumbly. Time to munch an early luncheon. Hum dee dum dum dum. Oh bother.
The way that people talk about the genres of these games, it's almost like a family tree, where a single game becomes like a parent, and then every game that takes inspiration from it becomes a child. So Dark Souls and Metroid fucked, and Hollow Knight was the resulting baby. But if Dark Souls also has Metroid DNA, then that means that they are related. But then who's the other parent? I don't know, maybe Ghosts and Goblins? Yeah, that is a difficult game with a medieval style. So I guess you could say Ghosts and Goblins is kind of like Dark Souls. Or rather, Dark Souls is a Ghosts and Goblins-like. And if Dark Souls and Metroid are related, then that means Hollow Knight is an incest baby. Should we combine the terms Metroidvania and Souls-like? And what if a game is inspired by both Hollow Knight and Dark Souls? Does it make it a Hollow Souls-Troidvania-like? Obviously I'm just taking the piss here. But this is the logical end result. We are so focused on turning entire games into genres and then saying that games inspired by multiple games are combinations of those genres. But the truth is that games already have multiple genres. I did a whole video on this, but it is extremely common for games to share these base genres. Just look how many games have some kind of platforming in them. Even when games don't share genres, they can still share mechanics that aren't part of any genre. As I recently explained in my roguelike video, mechanics like permadeath and procedural generation don't really belong to a single genre. Any game can make use of these if they want more content or a more punishing play experience. It's the same thing with leveling up mechanics, just another tool in the toolbox. We shouldn't be seeing game genres as a family tree where games give genes over to each other. Rather, we should see it more as a Venn diagram, where genres and mechanics combine to form a game, where multiple games can share classifications without being related. And hey, look! This Venn diagram kind of looks like the Elden Ring logo. Coincidence? I think not!
Bernie. Is this like a video game?
Sorta. But it uses the most powerful information processor in the world. Your box.
Alright, listen up nerds. Recently I made a video which I had cut out of a larger video, and now I'm doing it again. So if you came from that other video, this is the part you were waiting for. I realized that the way people use the term RPG is identical to how terms like Souls-like and roguelike are used, meaning that the word RPG is effectively a stand-in for Dungeons and Dragons-like. You see, the mechanics people call RPG elements, like classes, leveling up and experience points, have nothing to do with role-playing, but are just mechanics that are part of D&D. And since D&D is known as an RPG, people treat every mechanic in Dungeons & Dragons as belonging to the role-playing genre. So yes, games like Final Fantasy, Pokemon and Rogue are like D&D. They look like it, they have mechanics in common with it. But those are turn-based combat and progression mechanics they have in common, not the role-playing mechanics. And yeah, Rogue was inspired by D&D, making it a D&D-like. But then Rogue became a roguelike. And then Rogue Legacy was inspired by Rogue, which made it an RPG roguelike. And then if a game were to be inspired by Rogue Legacy, that game would be an RPG Rogue Legacy-like. So each game will just echo on to the next game and create this daisy chain of genres. But wait, as I'll be explaining in my RPG video, D&D was originally a mod of the game Chainmail, which is a war game. So you could say that D&D is actually a war game or Chainmail-like, which would logically mean that every game that's called an RPG should be renamed to war game. But Chainmail may also have been inspired by other war games, which were inspired by other games. Which then would mean that blah 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 Warpg Rogue Metroidvania Legacy. En Knuckles.
Ja, stop maar. Ik snap er geen kut van.
And now the conclusion.
So the ultimate lesson I'm trying to teach you all is, don't focus on what the game looks like, but try to identify the individual mechanics and then analyze how different games use those mechanics. And then you'll get a way better idea of how genres come together to make a game. The end. Hey, you made it to the end of the video? That means you like hearing me talk, right? Well, if you want to hear more from me, here are some other videos you can watch that are relevant to the video you just watched right now. Also, if you subscribe, you'll be notified when more of my ramblings get released. The next video will be about bringing an end to the Western RPG versus JRPG discussion. And I mean that one will have some information I guarantee you have never heard before. That discussion will never be the same after. Because it will be over. I promise, really. Oh, and I also have a Patreon now. There you can find a list of all the videos I intend to make. So if any of those seem interesting to you, donating would help to get those videos out faster. Some examples include a video on the real differences between turn-based and action games, what is wrong with point-and-click adventure games, as well as videos on gamification, visual novels, dating sims, AI in video games, and even entire video game analyses like Mega Man, Metroid, Kingdom Hearts, and many, many more. Very many more. Too many more, maybe. And all written from a game design perspective, so that should definitely deliver a unique experience. So yeah, thanks again for watching and peace out.